Welcome to the Fitness Pain-Free Show, where I help physical therapists learn how to get their clients out of pain and back to training in the gym. My name is Dan Pope, and I'll be your instructor. I'm a physical therapist, coach, and fellow meathead. I love training just as much as you do and want to help you get all of your patients out of pain and back to the gym where they belong. What's going on, guys? Welcome to the Fitness Pain-Free Show. Today's topic is how risky is it to push through injury when training? We're reviewing the article, Do Niggles Matter? Increase injury risk following physical complaints in football. Let's do it. So before we get started, I want to extend a big thank you for all the support you guys have shown me over the course of time. You really allow me to do what I love for a living, and that's helping people get out of pain and back to training. And if you don't know who I am, my name is Dan Pope. I'm a physical therapist, I am a coach, and I am a meathead. I love exercise. This is the Fitness Pain-Free Show, and it's where we help physical therapists get your patients out of pain and back to training. If you're seeing this from YouTube, please hit that like button, comment, and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out. And if you're listening to this in podcast format, please consider giving me a positive rating and review. Okay, let's get rolling. So why? Why are we even thinking about this subject in general? Well, here's the thing. Tweaks, tightness, small injuries, whatever you want to call them, they happen relatively frequently in the gym. And here's the thing. Oftentimes we can kind of push through these, right? And, sometimes they get better over the course of time, and sometimes they turn into bigger problems. I can't tell you how many times this has happened to me. I'm confronted with this problem, I train through it, it gets better. And sometimes I'm confronted with this problem, I train through it, and it gets worse, right? So here's the thing. How risky is it to push through these smaller injuries? And are we always going to get hurt if we do this over the course of time? So the article we're reviewing is called Do Niggles Matter? Increase injury risk following physical complaints in football, or soccer if you're from the United States. So a couple things they were talking about in this article. One is it's kind of hard to quantify injury severity, right? And if you start reading through some injury research, you'll see this really fast, okay? And it's actually quite important to differentiate between these kind of easy, small injuries that are kind of tweaks in nature and the ones that are more severe, right? So one of the ways they do that is quantifying injuries as either A, time loss injuries, so basically you're forced to stop playing, competing, whatever it is, and non-time loss injuries where you can kind of continue playing over the course of time. And that's one of the things they were looking at in this study. So what they were trying to question was, do non-time loss injuries lead to time loss injuries? Okay, so if I have a smaller injury that's not stopping me from playing my sport, will that lead to a time loss injury where the injury is bad enough that I have to stop, right? And if they do correlate, how closely, right? So if I have one of these non-time loss injuries, how likely am I to have this injury progress into something worse or get a separate injury that's going to set me aside? So let's take a look at the participants here. They're looking at 25 teams or 10 semi-professional football soccer clubs, and this data was all taken during the season. All the players had at least 3 sessions per week. That could be training, that also could be games. They were looking at 218 total players that filled out the questionnaires, which I think was only around 30-something% of all the people they tried to get into the study, which is kind of low. And the duration was 35 total weeks of training. Their injury definition was from a questionnaire called the OSTRC, something I'm not particularly familiar with, but maybe I need to be after looking through this study. And an injury that was qualified as non-time lost was considered any physical complaint where the participant had full participation with health problems or reduced participation due to health problems. When I saw that portion about reduced participation due to health problems, it kind of seemed a bit like an actual time loss injury, right? Because a non-time loss, by definition is you don't lose any time. If you're partially participating, you're kind of losing time, right? Anyway, that's how they qualified a non-time loss injury anyway. And then time loss injury was the inability to fully participate in football training or matches, right? So one's more severe than the other, and the time loss, you're actually losing important time playing. So what were the results? The results here was that the risk of time loss injury was 3.6 to 6.9 times higher when preceded by non-time loss complaints in the following 7 days. So basically, if you had a non-time loss injury over the next 7 days, you are 3.6 to 6 times more likely to sustain a time loss injury, right? Pretty high. That's a big number there. 68% of all time loss injuries were preceded with a non-time loss injury. So that means that the majority of injuries that occurred that were time loss, or the more serious injuries, were preceded by a non-time loss injury. 94% of knee and 90% of hamstring time loss injuries were preceded with a non-time loss injury in the same location, right? Because I could potentially have a little irritation in my knee and kind of play through it and then get an injury to the opposite knee or the opposite hamstring, right? And that's not in the same exact area. But for knee and hamstring injuries, which were the most common injuries, if you had some irritation in one area, let's say my hamstring was irritating me, then the likelihood of that turning into a bigger injury was much higher, right? And for the majority of these time loss injuries, they were preceded by the non-time loss injury in the same area, right? Like I said previously, the hamstring and the knee were the most common injury sites. If you follow injury stats for field athletes, that's no surprise. Hamstring is generally the biggest one. 85% of all reported injuries were non-time loss. So a large majority of injuries here were non-time loss. They were not that bad, right? They weren't forcing folks to stop playing, okay? And the other piece is that 49% of all players reported some sort of injury within a given week, which is pretty wild to think about it, right? So all healthy folks, or just the majority of people that are actually playing, half of those guys are going to have some sort of pain problem at any given point, right? So everyone's kind of hurting to a small extent. So what are the conclusions from this study? So what's really interesting about this is that non-time loss injuries had a good predictive power for future injury. Like I said previously, if you had a non-time loss injury, you were 3 to 7 times more likely to sustain a more serious time loss injury, right? And here's what's kind of cool. The predictive power of these non-time loss injuries were better than workload-related risk factors previously studied in pro football. So if you're familiar with Tim Gabbett's work at all, he's looking at workloads, right? Specifically acute to chronic workload ratios. So how much work have you been used to doing and how much work are you doing currently? And if there's a big mismatch, right, or a big spike in the total volume of training, you're more likely to get hurt. Well, that's got pretty good predictive power, but guess what's better? These non-time loss injuries, right? What's kind of cool about that is that could potentially be used for future injury risk reduction. So does that mean we need to incorporate some sort of rehab program for folks that have these little tweaks, right? Maybe they need to take additional time off. Maybe they need to modify their training somewhat. We don't necessarily know what to do for those folks just yet, but it is starting to get us thinking about what we can do to help these guys. Right? What were my clinical takeaways? So first and foremost, I'm a gym guy. I'm a weight room guy. The majority of the patients that I treat are generally people in the fitness world, right? So does this carry over to the weight room? And honestly, I don't know. I really don't know if it does. I think it probably does. I don't have research to support that, but I would say that this is consistent to what I see. So some folks will come in to see me and maybe they have a little bit of tweak, some sort of irritation, and generally it worsens over the course of time. It's pretty common for an overuse injury for that to happen. You do see some folks get hurt all at once with no sort of information before that you're going to get hurt, right? No of those prodromal symptoms, whatever they call it in the medical literature. But I would say the large majority of folks that I see, they have some sort of tweak, they have some sort of tightness, and it turns into something worse over the course of time. Right. The other cool thing is that this is a potentially strong injury risk factor, more powerful than workload. So if you've been following some of the research in the risk factor world, you'll know that Tim Gabbett's research is huge, workload and workload management is enormous, right? So we need to be smart about the way we train our athletes. But the other part is that, well, if they're not feeling great, they have these small tweaks. That is an incredibly important thing, at least based on this one study. Obviously, you need to have more future research to see if this is validated, A, in the same population, but B, in other populations as well, right? So does this take into account what happens in the weight room as opposed to just, the soccer field, right? And the other part too is that, and this is what I do currently, so this whole study really was a confirmation bias to me. I saw this and I was like, oh gosh, this is exactly what I would love to hear, because this is what I think is currently happening in my world. So if someone does have some sort of pain in the gym, can we maybe modify those painful movements, right? So if my knee hurts when I squat, maybe I need to reduce that load. Maybe I need to reduce the speeds of that movement a little bit. Maybe I'm changing to a different movement that's a little more friendly on my knee. And hopefully by doing that in the long run, I'll have less, more serious injury over the course of time, right? Maybe that means I need to reduce my training loads over the course of time. So if I have a small tweak in my knee from squatting, then maybe I need to take a little extra time off, right? Or maybe I lower the total volume of knee intensive exercises, or like I said before, the intensity. So what I think this study did do is confirm my bias that if you have some sort of tweak or injury, then that means you're more likely to have something worse over the course of time. And, we probably should be doing something about this, whether that's maybe modifying, reducing training loads, something, take some time off, just utilizing this as a good risk factor for future problems and taking a little bit of warning, right? And well, that's it, guys. Thank you very, very much for joining me. If you want to read this study yourself, here is a citation right here. Thank you for all of your support. I really, really do appreciate it. Again, if you're on YouTube, please give me a thumbs up on this video. Comment below. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on this study, and subscribe, okay? If you're listening to this on a podcast, please leave me a positive rating and review, and I'll see you guys in the next one.